Hey guys, welcome to our first episode. How we doing?
Excited.
Good, doing well.
Anxiety, yeah.
Anxiety.
I had a coach once tell me that the only difference between anxiety and excitement is perception. Just choose which one you want it to be. So, how you doing, Connor?
Good, doing well.
Well, I guess, first of all, Byron, you just got back from Wilson 360's Leadership Summit. Could you tell us a little bit about that experience and what you had brought back to our leadership team meeting today?
Yeah, the group was made up of landscape design firms who have migrated from project-based landscaping to maintenance-based, and seeing the valuations of their firms just skyrocket. And they talked about the best practices, the technology that they used, and how they organized their people, and actually, it was interesting. There were some good stories on how people migrated from project to maintenance. And, it doesn't happen just overnight. And since the group was pretty small, there's like 75 or 80 people there, I think. There's very intimate. People were willing to share a lot. So I would say it'd be a model for a conference. If I was a business owner in the green industry, I definitely want to be in on that action. Because, man, the best practices were flowing.
Yeah, you mentioned that there was a couple of case studies that they had shared where companies had made the transition from project to maintenance. I think is kind of the model that was being advocated for.
Yeah, they had a case study that they went through as a group exercise that laid out a fact set where an organization had been primarily project oriented, and the operations leader was an old school landscaper who was, looking at things like analog, and they were trying to move into more digitized and systemized and processed. And he had a really hard time with the migration. And so much so that he ultimately he had to leave. And it wasn't a very amicable departure, because he'd been there for so long, 20 some years, that in his departure, he took along like 10 technicians with him, which was very painful for the company. And there's a lot of rebuilding after that. And the learning from that is, if you enable behavior for a long enough time, then people get used to that dysfunction. And when the person who's running that is choosing to move his or her talent somewhere else, chances are he's going to take a lot of people with him that are kind of enjoyed the security of that methodology of doing things like a fairly predictable way. And none of those people were being forced to change because they had resisted it, uniformly across the board. And so now the aftermath of that was, all right, we lost several $1 million of the revenue. We need to rebuild, but they rebuilt with a new vigor focused on the maintenance business, and had no resistance from that. So I thought that was an excellent example of, if you're trying to make a change in an organization and people aren't buying in, you really want the change, you're probably going to have to lose some people and be okay with it.
Were they going to
painful?
Break some eggs, or
got to break some eggs to make an omelet?
Yeah. I was talking to David at Farriot earlier this week, and he was walking me through his experience. I think he had 6 times on the Inc. 5000 list, and he said they doubled twice at that company. He said every time they doubled, they had to tear everything down and rebuild it. So that was kind of interesting. And we talked about that today in our meeting. But yeah, I guess, Connor, I'm kind of curious what this experience is like, because we're doing something similar at TMG, right? So what's it been like for you to go from going through this legacy process to the kind of the process that they were describing at Wilson?
Yeah, we're actively working on transitioning our process from a project-based focus to, say, a maintenance business. And I would say that having a facilitator or somebody or some coach that's holding us accountable, that's outside, has been important in making this change. And then trusting the process, or trusting that as you go through and make decisions and make changes, that it's going to work out. But so yeah, it's not easy. We're not looking to lose anybody or lose revenue as we go through it. So I think the biggest thing for me is just trusting the people that we have around us to help us work through how we think about delivering our services to our clients, and doing so that it puts us in a position where we can successfully go from that project-based structure to that maintenance-based structure. So yeah, at the outset, at the beginning that we've just started, I'd say that's the biggest thing now is having somebody that we can look to help us guide us through this process.
Yeah, there's certain kind of like act of faith, right? Like jumping off a cliff and hoping that the water's deep enough.
Exactly
Or
right.
yeah, yeah. Well, it's cool.
And,
So
and I would say it's I guess focusing on the small things. And we've talked about kind of depositing $100 and building habits or in actions that we're taking that might take a little bit longer or might require a little bit more effort now in making this change, but knowing long term that if we are consistent in doing that, say week in and week out, well, that it'll essentially get us to the position that we want to be long term.
yeah, what deposits have you made this week that have stood out for you?
A big one is just is tied to how we communicate within the team on tasks and action items related to the work that we're doing. And so recently, yesterday, as an example, in working with Jared on our team, how to communicate essentially an outstanding task that needs to get done using Claude as our virtual personal assistant and having that update the tasks and due date and description of what we need to get done versus say just stopping by his office or sending an email. So that was $100 deposit that I made yesterday. But
Yeah, that's great. Did it feel kind of weird doing that?
To try to say build towards that ultimate maintenance.
Well, cool. Well, thank you guys for sharing that experience. Thanks, Byron, for talking about Wilson. I think you're good buddies with Robert Klinkenbeard, so he's going to be probably happy to hear you had a good time. I want to pivot to something that happened to us this week and get your guys' take on it. So we have the Transferable Value Index that's open to business owners of all sizes, really, to kind of go in and spend 4 minutes, answer 12 questions, and figure out kind of where they're at on the transferable value mountain. We had somebody come through who was really interesting. So they scored as an owner dependent success. They scored about a 50 out of 100. Business durability was super high and owner independence was pretty low. So they scored a 20 out of 30 for business durability and 11 out of 30 on independence. And what I thought was interesting about this is that the person that took this is one of two partners in a consulting firm. So one of the partners, the one that didn't take the TVI, was the founder and partner, and then the junior partner was the one that took the TVI. And it brought up an idea in my head, because I think this was kind of similar to when John and Connor, you guys had taken the TVI, and then you had a different score set than Byron's. Your scores were super consistent, but Byron's looked a little different, where TMG looked like a transferable enterprise to Byron, but for you and John, it was owner dependent success. So, but what it got me thinking about, and I just wanted to test this hypothesis with you guys, is it, my bet is in this case too, if that other partner took the TVI, they'd probably be in a similar spot where they're looking at the business as a transferable enterprise. Their partner is looking at it as an owner dependent success. I'm curious if you guys think that's going to be a pattern that we're going to see moving forward. And, and maybe if it is a pattern, what does that mean to the business owners that are taking the TVI and are seeing the kind of the difference in scores, the delta between their scores and maybe their leaders and co-owners?
Yeah, that's an interesting data point and observation. I would say, to me, and I'd be really curious to Byron and Connor's perspective on this, but to me, if it looked like ours, where there was the founder answering questions that made the business be less owner independent, and then let's say the successors answering that it might be, which means it would be indicated that they had done some level of succession planning. Whether they had formally transitioned ownership is fairly irrelevant. It's the more the roles and responsibilities have begun to be transitioned. That's what it would indicate to me if you had that variance between, let's say, the top 3 or 4 in a company.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing, and I wouldn't be surprised if that is what the data shows as more and more, say, partners of organizations take the TVI. And I think one thing it might lead to is for, say, certain founder owners or certain partners, they might be underestimating the value that they bring, maybe with their key relationships or, what their involvement is in business development, and thinking that, or other areas that they may be contributing, and the other partners might view it a little bit differently in the light that the role or the responsibilities that other partners playing is more important, or maybe doesn't have a formal transition plan established, make it less less owner dependent, if that makes sense.
Actually, it didn't. You want to just restate it? So, like, yeah, help me for the audience of neophytes of the uneducated. How could you?
Yeah. So if one owner, scores higher, saying that we have a transferable enterprise, and the partner isn't there yet and is saying it's an owner dependent business at the time, I think it goes to that there's a disconnect between the owners potentially to what level they're at in certain roles or responsibilities, or what the bench strength is to fulfill each owner's, say, role or responsibility. So one that's scoring higher, saying we're transferable, they might think that, hey, we have a team that's capable of going out and creating new relationships and growing the organization. And the other owner might not share that same viewpoint, and saying, we don't have a capable team or a capable person to succeed you in going out and taking over those key relationships or generating new business for the organization. So I think there could be a disconnect, or maybe a discrepancy on how they see themselves within the organization, if we're getting two different results or scores for where partners see themselves or see the business.
Well, I think the thing that stands out to me, Connor, is, like, at least in this iteration of the TBI, the way the questions are phrased are around the individual responding to the question. So it's essentially asking, like, to what extent is the business dependent on you to bring in new business? And then it asks kind of, like, gives it percentages. So it's the way it's currently phrased is essentially two partners. One of them might score really high in that domain, another might score low, meaning, like, one partner is disconnected from business development, another is super recognizes that the business is super reliant on them. So I guess that almost comes to mind, is like, this is probably going to be a component then of interpreting TBI results for business owners, that it's not going to be as simple as maybe get your report and roll.
Yes, you say depending on what seat they sit in or what their role is within the organization, it could impact kind of how the score comes out.
Yeah, I think so. And then I think, like, okay, so if that's true, then that's probably a source of friction, unless they're being compensated for the friction. I don't know. Is this standing up, Byron, to your, like, have we lost the plot, or are we kind of tracking on it some?
Perhaps it's the way that the question's phrased. So if I'm the ops partner and I take the assessment, and to the extent that the business is relying on me for new business, I'd say not, then perhaps it would be, the question might be better framed: to what extent, if you are in a partnership, is the new business reliant upon your partner? And if you think about a sale of a company with two owners in it, you're really evaluating each owner's role and how that role contributes to value. And if we ask the ops partner about biz dev, they're gonna, well, I don't have much to do, we're good. But then who are we relying on? Are we relying on the other owner, or are we relying on somebody that's going to stay after the transition? So might be a perspective, like
the company perspective versus the actual individual perspective in their role.
Well, the concern is that our goal of asking the question is to determine how much the business would feel. How would it feel if the business owner was no longer involved in the day-to-day? And if you have partners, then it's a question of, okay, maybe the context is it expected that this partner is going to be treated like an employee after the sale and stay in? And yeah, that's transferable because they're going to be there, and we don't have to worry about that. But if they're not, then I think you'd have to answer the question of, like, when you filled it out, like, how reliant is the business on me for new business? You say not, but it's really relying on, say, me as an example. Then it would not be, I don't know, maybe the question wouldn't necessarily be revealing that clearly, that reliance.
Well, I think that kind of goes to the importance of at least having the results of all the owners when it comes into a conversation about the TVI. We can't just take one person's perspective unless they're the sole owner. We really need then to get everybody's take that's going to be part of the deal to be able to kind of do risk analysis, to be able to really think clearly about what the path looks like for them.
Yeah, the whole purpose is to reveal conditions that you'd want to focus on with your coach or advisor that would improve the transferability of the business to a buyer, whether the buyer's management or a sale outsiders. So that's our goal, is to reveal that. So whatever we might need to do to frame the assessment to a person who is in a partnership, that might be a beta or next version modification.
Yeah, and perhaps you would ask when you're putting in your email before you even start the questionnaire, are you a majority business owner or sole owner, majority interest, minority interest? Because that might be revealing to the same answer. Like, I'll take Project Circuit, which was our most recent transaction with third party that closed. And in that transaction, you had a 90-10 split. The 90% owner would have answered the questions that it was diversified from. He had a sales team, probably similarly to the owner dependent score maybe that Byron had, that was better than the one that Connor and I had because of our perspective. Versus the 10% employee might have answered those questions a 10% partner might have answered those questions completely differently. And there would have been more dependence on because he wasn't seeing the business from the same chair that the 90% guy was.
Yeah, you got a real example there, so that's worth way more than.
And even to that point in the transaction, the 10% guy rolled equity and is going to have a longer term employment with the acquirer, and that was their goal. They wanted the majority owner around for a period of time, but they really were okay with them ultimately exiting within a reasonable time frame, 12 to 18 months. The key employee, they're hoping to stay on through their next liquidation event because he's 42 years old and he's got a whole career in front of him. And so it worked. And that would even tie it back to the PEC in a way, because he was vested prior to the sale. He's vested now with equity in the current buyer, and should be through there, probably transition to 3 to 5 years from now when they sell again. In that specific scenario.
So in the case when minority ownership is present with key employees, it isn't so much about succession as ownership as it is about retention reward for ownership, and that we're using ownership as a way to retain you. And if we're in a very competitive marketplace like this person was,
absolutely,
a lot of people recruiting this 10% owners, somebody with their credentials.
Absolutely.
Then so the ownership it really doesn't represent partner as much as it represents retention and reward.
Absolutely.
That's what I had to do to keep you.
Precisely.
And then didn't you have another one with where the son of the successor had the same situation?
Yeah, exactly. And what was great about that is they had a little bit of ownership, but maybe not as meaningful amount as the acquirer wanted. So there was a desire to get the son of the organization some bit of payday on their sale, but it was more important to actually, and ultimately both parties, the acquirer and the son himself, who wanted to be able to experience the growth and get that return. And then, the acquirer, the private equity group, was looking at the son to run the organization into the future, and therefore wanted him to have skin in the game. So it became a retain and reward mechanism
which they ultimately ended up adding to the existing equity that was rolled, the management incentive program that we participated in designing as part of the overall transaction. What's interesting about that case is not only did we have some of it built in because of our proactive nature and understanding of how to retain and reward key employees, we had influence both from the transaction and on the incentive plan going forward for that son and his management team.
So if staying on the theme of partners completing the TVI and having variance in the result, maybe scores might be similar total, but they're unique. Each question might be scored differently. How do you think the son would he have had a different perspective than the father on how reliant the business was on him, the son?
Yes,
that's the perspective of the TVI, isn't it? It's like
they would have had a different perspective on that for sure. And it was that would go, it was kind of twofold. It was, to a degree, the customer diversification had occurred, and I think the founding owner would acknowledge some of that. Operationally, he had not let go of many of those things that would have been dependent on him, that he believed was dependent on him, and the son also would have believed was dependent on himself.
On the son, not on the dad.
Not on the dad, on the son. Correct. And so, and that was actually something that ultimately the acquirer understood through diligence, and they found a really, again, with our, I'd say, understanding of what was important to the business owner, keeping the founder in a role that was ultimately ceremonial and giving it ultimately is an advantage to then give the keys completely to the son that was going to run it, including the equity that came with getting those keys, because he had been in a dynamic relationship with his father and running and it completely succeeding and taking over the reins of the business, if you will. And so it actually ended up being an advantage to have him tied in, and the private equity firm saw what we understood when we underwrote the deal. And actually, when we did an assessment, a TVR, to determine pathway of selling it to the son and his management team versus selling to a third party and including that son and management team in the equity rollover, which is what they ultimately wanted, was get in the game to be able to continue to grow the enterprise and get the reward from that.
So the conclusion could be that two people taking the same assessment, if one's pessimistic and the other one's optimistic, even if they all have access to all the information, probably likely they're going to have a difference. They're going to have a unique scoring perspective on it, because the father was pessimistic about the team's ability to run the operation, and the son was confident.
Correct.
Yeah. So it's where having an outside advisor like a coach involved to really, have hard assessments of that reality and have those crucial conversations is really helpful.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that's going to be kind of gold for us to unpack over time as the different versions of that, and being able to share the experiences that we've had. I guess let's before we wrap, Daniel, our illustrious producer, has given us the prompt of, we went on a fishing trip this last weekend. Does anybody have any fishing experiences that are transferable to business from our weekend in the Snake?
So,
yeah,
if you guys don't mind. So, with experience, you have, and you can see where something probably exists just from what it is that you can see. But below the surface, you don't know that it's really there. You almost have to test it, that it actually exists. So, for example, we were standing in a riffle, and Connor and John and I were together, and there was an invitation on their part. Hey, Byron, would you just fish this? You said there are fish here. Would you just fish this and show us what if that's the case? And so I was able to see where the fish were probably going to be, and had the experience to put the fly where it needed to go. And sure enough, there were 3 or 4 fish there. So how does that relate to business? Is that the ability for a person to observe conditions that suggests to them that opportunity exists usually comes through time and mistakes, and that you don't just learn that's where the fish are going to be by going fishing once. You stand over unproductive water for hours wondering why they're not biting, and you can see them and they can
Right.
see you. And that's the problem, is that everybody sees each other, so there isn't anybody fooling each other. And in business, being able to see opportunity where perhaps it isn't very obvious, but based on your experience, that's where the opportunity exists. And then having an approach that has proven to be successful. And if you take a novice caster without a lot of technique, chances are they're going to do something to that spot where the fish are not going to respond. So being able to see and then act on it through experience is beneficial. Hopefully you don't have to wait for 25 years to gather that experience, but that would be transferable for me, from my perspective.
Yeah. From going back to earlier about Byron's experience with the lawn and landscape conference on moving from project-based to maintenance-based, and what I had alluded to earlier about our experience in going through that would be going into something that's new or unfamiliar. Me being a novice fly fisherman, going into the river or the stream, trying to fish for trout, having somebody like Byron there, that's a guy that knows it and has experienced it and made the mistakes and sat for hours over unproductive water, and trusting when he says fish or cast over there and then work your way in, cast a second time in the middle of the ripple and then a third time nearest to us, and trusting that and doing that over the course of 3 hours. The connection I would make to business or in our experience at TMG and going through a big change would be having that guide there, trusting that guide that over time you will catch fish, you will be successful, and hopefully you do it in a quick enough or a less painful way than doing it on your own. So that would be kind of my, to connect it back to earlier about transitioning from the project to the maintenance-based business is having that guide there.
Yeah, mine's similar. Thanks for sharing both of those. It's to me, it was teamwork and intent were probably the two themes I would take out of the weekend from my perspective standing in the river. Because I get the pleasure of fishing with Alex and Byron, which is like going with professional golfers, and this is your first time on the golf course, or maybe not first time, but first time this year on the golf course. And so it takes teamwork to get down there. But shit, I don't even prep my rod. My rod gets handed to me ready to go. I know that it takes intent and thoughtfulness as to what to even put on that line, how to even tie the knots properly. But I got handed that by my my compadres and guide, and then you get down there and you fish, and it's just similar to the Byron telling you where to put it. It means you have to actually learn how to get it there, which takes probably for someone that's done it 10, 12 times or so trips maybe in the lifetime is after a year or two not doing it, takes several. Maybe the whole first day until I was catching them. And then I caught 2 in a row at the end of the day after teamwork. And the intent part comes with not just knowing where to put it, but being intentional with all of your movement throughout, because you can get wrapped around the axle or wrapped around the rod pretty quickly out there in technical fly fishing waters that we were fishing, especially. So it was teamwork and intent. And I think that transfers to business and everything. It takes a team to get to reach the milestones that you set together as a business. And it certainly takes intent, or you can get wrapped around the axle pretty quick. I'd wrap that back into our accountability itself, which we've known is important for all of my tenure. But like anything, you get busy in business and busy maybe fulfilling business and lack the accountability to your own company at times that maybe you should give it. So that would be in a nutshell what I learned from our fly fishing trip together at our annual McFarland Group trip to the Snake River.
Great share. I think that the only thing I was imagining the whole time, John, was the lines that you come across down there of flies hanging off of trees.
Yes.
Yeah.
Was able to successfully retrieve all my flies that got stuck in trees, I believe. Maybe besides
That's progress. That's progress. Sometimes you get down there and you're just like, all right, yank, break it off. We're moving on. Yeah, which is
Moving on.
probably its own business lesson. I think mine for that experience was my happiest times fishing with Dad are when he goes right and I go left, and we meet back at the cabin. So it's good that we both are able to do that, and I think the transfer there is kind of will call back to what we were talking about, the sometimes the generational challenge between one way of doing it that's proven and another way that's maybe less proven, and the gray beard having to just let him struggle at the hole, and fish for himself, and maybe he'll figure it out, maybe he won't, but there's probably an act of faith there that's relevant to business.
That's
But
right.
well, cool guys.
Even
Well, thank
figured
you.
out how to integrate technology in this fish, and maybe how close to get, how close not to get.
Yeah. Well, we might have that as a highlight reel when Byron's telling his story, is the drone attacking that fly line. So, but cool guys. Well, thank you for getting together. We'll, I think we just wrap it here and come back together again next week and share some more stories and kind of what we're thinking about, what's going on.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.